thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity to present our study here in this conference. I apologize for my colleagues. I suppose they couldn't manage to connect today, but in any case, I'm presenting on their behalf too. So this survey, this study is a part of two projects that are developed at the University of Verona, which are Inclusive Humanities Project of Excellence and Print 2022 syllabus. All these two projects deals with teaching Russian as a foreign language in particular. And our working team is dealing with a sub-project, which is extraction of metalinguistic notions from textbooks for teaching Russian as a foreign language and as a heritage language. Why metalinguistic notions? Because while acquiring grammatical skills, of course, we know is essential in the process of learning a foreign language, these skills are not always accompanied by metalinguistic awareness from the side of the students, of course. Sometimes they do not have the capacity to use knowledge about language, or they do not develop the ability to reflect upon the nature and the functions of language. So our project is developing into three main phases, let's say. The first one is corpora creation. We have already created this corpora. These corpora include textbooks for teaching Russian as a foreign language, commonly used at the university in Italy, and they are aimed at supporting the instruction of metalinguistic notions. Then we concentrated on this questionnaire, which is the focus of this presentation, and in order to investigate the specific linguistic and educational needs of the students in the Italian university. And then our goal is to try to develop instructional strategies and resources informed by the corpora and tailored to the identified needs of heritage speakers, thanks to this questionnaire. Why we felt this necessity, this need? Because majority of us is working teach in class in mixed classrooms. That is, classroom where there are both students learning Russian as a foreign language and students learning Russian as heritage language. So there are interesting debates about what to do in these cases. So many scholars think that could be interesting to develop different separated pathways, taking into account the different cultural, pedagogical, motivational, affective backgrounds of these two typologies of students. And nevertheless, there could be a sort of integration, why not? And we could organize some group so that they can work together, but the group should be organized, carefully designed to take into account different proficiency levels, different motivational, pedagogical, and affective needs. And these issues has been studied in Italy also, and one of Italian scholars, Perotto, speaks about the important role of school language learning, that is, of the formal institutional environment, because we can have some heritage speakers learning Russian in the wild, that is outside the classroom or in the classroom. So our research is driven by practical needs. We have heritage speakers in our classroom, and we want to understand how to deal with within these mixed classrooms. And of course, many scholars have already started and are still studying on these items, on these issues. Just to name some of them, Irina Dubinina, which is with us today, and Kisselev, Olesya, and I thanks very much because I have the opportunity to enter in contact with their jobs, with their studies, and I think I feel honored having the possibility to share your expertise with us, with our experience. And the Italian context. In Italy, when students learn Russian at the university, they usually follow two different courses, that is, two parallel courses, language assistant courses, much devoted to students' communicative competence, and then institutional courses oriented towards the development of translation, grammar, or metalinguistic awareness. And so we come to the questionnaire. So we started analyzing previously validated questionnaire, HELEX questionnaire, or the language and social background questionnaire, or the language experience and proficiency questionnaire. They are all questionnaire that deals with heritage speakers and validated many aspects, as for example, language backgrounds of the students, language exposure, language dominance or language entropy, or communicative context, proficiency levels, and that's so on. So they were very useful for us in order to learn how to construct and which items a questionnaire can, in a certain way, propose. And then also this questionnaire gave us any insights about the typology of the data that we can collect. It could be qualitative or quantitative data. And depending on that, we organize the different typologies of questions, as we will see. But we, in a certain way, we took advantage, of course, of these questionnaires, but then we adapted our questionnaire according to our research needs, of course. So the population, as we have already told, is the target population is heritage learners, heritage speakers of Russian. At the university, studying at the university from the bachelor to the PhD courses. And the tool we use is Microsoft Form. We kept the questionnaire open for 20 days this April. And the goal is shedding light on the experience of the students teaching Russian, learning Russian as a foreign language, as a second language, yes, with a particular focus on metalinguistic notions. These respondents should have three prerequisites. That is, they should have been exposed even minimally to the Russian language in childhood, since childhood. They should not have obtained a high school degree in Russia or в русском контексте, в русском секторе, скажем, and they should have attended or should be attending courses of Russian at the university at the moment, or just finished to attend the course. And the three main sections of our questionnaire investigates most of all the family educational background of the students, then their experience of studying Russian at the university in Italy, and then the motivation to study Russian and self-perceptions. So there are 22 questions in the questionnaire, different typologies, one on multiple choice, Likert scale, yes or no questions, and open questions, and piloting 2 informants. So the informants, the respondents were 22. This is the first preliminary study, we say, but we hope we are confident there will be more respondents in the future. The average age is 25. The gender, as you see, is most female. And when we ask whether they were born in Italy, 12 out of 22 were born in Italy. The other were born in other countries, but they live in Italy for more than 6 years. And they were born in Moldavia, in Russia, one of them in Russia, and 3 of them in Ukraine, and other they didn't specify. When we ask how do you identify your nationality, as you may see, there is much more variability in nationality. So 6 of them Italian, then 4 Moldavian, and then we have 3 which feel themselves Italo-Russians, some of them just Russian, and then Hungarian, Ukrainian, Moldovan, and other. They didn't specify, just wrote mixed. So, but we can see, as far as nationality is concerned, there is much variability. When we asked them how often did you hear Russian as a child, of course they answered for the majority in different contexts, of course, or at home, outside the context, outside the family, or media, cartoons and video games. Most of them answered at home and during watching TV, cartoons, video games, of course, and we could expect that answer, and also the same answer when we asked how often did you speak Russian as a child, and most of them spoke Russian at home, of course. And now, currently, which is the language they predominantly use at home, most of them answered as Italian, or a mixture of Italian and Russian. But there is also others that speak a mixture of main languages. It's because of different nationalities, of course. So a mixture of Italian-Hungarian or Italian-Romanian, or 3 languages: Italian, Russian, Romanian, or Russian, Moldovan, Romanian. Majority of them Italian or Italian-Russian. So the first part was devoted to their background. Now we are speaking about their experience of studying Russian at the university. And so when we asked which language skills do you think you developed most at the university, the majority of them answered metalinguistic awareness, writing and reading. So the 3 on the top, we believe, are very significant because they give us the result, the information that they are in need of these notions, of course. And then, as listening, comprehension, interaction, and speaking is concerned, we feel there are less problems in native speakers. So problems could emerge once they had to write, or they have to write, or they are to explain the function of a specific grammatical expression of a grammatical moment, but they have less problems when speaking or just listening. Then we ask them the effectiveness of, for example, textbooks, grammars, or materials used in these courses, both assistant teachers courses and institutional courses, or effectiveness of methods, strategies, or topics covered in these courses. And in general, they seem to be quite satisfied about all of them, but it seems there are still some problems as far as metalinguistic notions is concerned. If there are some problems, these problems are to be related to metalinguistic notions. Sometimes they feel a lack of explanation and practice about this field, about this issue, and then they feel much more comfortable when teachers sometimes use material not meant for instruction, that is, for example, real articles, authentic materials. So they think they can better understand the functioning of language, and still they feel there is a lack in the practical aspect of the language. And then we ask them, what do you think about studying together with students, studying Russian as a foreign language, so in these mixed classrooms? And as far as for peer interactions or interaction with teachers of language teachers, assistants, or in institutional courses. And they are quite split into 2. That is, on the one side, they say, yes, okay, it's not bad, because when students studying Russian as a foreign language have some question or curiosity, they could be useful also for us, because they can shed light on some aspects of Russian as heritage language also. And then we can compare different languages. We can make some parallelism. So in the contrastive aspect is very good. But on the other side, when we ask them that from 1 to 10 to tell us how useful do you think it would be to set up pathways specifically designed for speakers of Russian as heritage language, they answered 8 out of 10. They answered, yes, it could be good. Because sometimes they feel themselves skipped, because maybe teachers thinks, okay, you already know Russian, so you don't need any other explanation. And sometimes they feel material and method should be different. So why not trying to create some differentiation in these pathways? And about motivation, which is the final section, the majority of them answered awareness of having gaps in the language I already know fairly well. So they know the language, but they want to improve their knowledge. So there's a source of pride and self-determinations. And then they answered interest in culture, in literature, the second place, which is also interesting because they wanted to keep the bond with the origins, with their traditions. And then, of course, career, future job opportunities. Then I added it in green some comments, because we gave also the possibility to give comments outside the semi-structural questions. And this is interesting because once this person, when he applied to university, Russian was the closest thing that is language to Ukrainian. So it is the need to keep the bonds with the tradition and the origin of the origins. And when we ask them which are the factors that most influence, on their opinion, the maintenance of Russian language among Russian speakers in future generation, at first they mentioned 2 factors mainly: family, so the possibility of continuing speaking Russian in the family, and the possibility of accessing educational courses in that language, that is school and university. They are less interested in society, and it seems to be, for the moment, less interested in the public context. I mean, but maybe when we collect more responses, we will see. We know. And in their opinion, what are the attitudes of the society they live in towards Russian language? And also in this case, I have the impression they are not so worried. So some of them think the society does not support Russian language at all, but they feel free to speak the language they want. I mean, they don't feel any pressure in speaking their language. And other, on the contrary, thinks that they don't feel like asking for more support than is already there. So they feel that society is doing something, is to preserve Russian language, indeed. So we have this a mixture of answers. They stay in the middle, in the middle, but they don't seem worried about their not being accepted, not being too much accepted in the society. Not at all. So, concluding, we saw that we are speaking about a very heterogeneous group in the Italian university, okay, I mean time, and both in terms of country of birth and nationality. The language they use there's much more variability at home, and then less variability in the social context, of course. The motivation is mostly self-determination. They want to improve their knowledge of Russian language, and then also for future generations. And then they want to preserve the language also for cultural interests, of course. And as far as institutional schools, they are fundamental. They play a great role in promoting the spread of Russian language, of course. And so we have to work hard on that. And as far as courses is concerned, particularly highlighting how metalinguistic notions, together with writing and reading, play a fundamental role in development of their skills. And they favor, in a certain way, the grammatical aspect of the language and fewer problems with orality. Materials, methods, and topics covered in general are good, but they think they could, in a certain way, we could as teachers in a certain way differentiate them because they have different needs, these two typologies of learners. And so why not trying to build some specifically designed pathways for heritage learners, or why not trying to build up a combination of the two? And then we are, at the end of this, we are organized in Verona a focus group with some students, with some of the students answering our questionnaire and trying to go in deep to some aspects that we have already analyzed in the questionnaire. And then as a final slide, I put these two comments of two students, because at the end of the questionnaire, we ask them just to leave some free comments, and they are both interesting. So I wanted to share with you. The one on the left side indeed explains why targeted courses could be interesting, because they would allow not only to consolidate skill often acquired informally, that is in the wild, but also to create a bridge between the family dimension of language and its academic and professional use. And I think quite interesting, this answer. On the other side, it was quite these heritage speakers feel themselves sometimes as heritage, sometimes as semi-native speakers. And so one wrote that there are rules that I find it hard to understand the way they are explained to Italian students, because usually we tend to simplify sometimes, or tricks that are used to understand the linguistic mechanism that an Italian student could not use. So why not consider the possibility of an integration of the courses of pathways? Okay, thanks for listening. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, and congratulations to your team for finding 22 participants already and continuing research. Continuing the study
in 20 days.
In 20 days,
so
yeah, that's
not bad. Not bad, considering they're a particular category of learners.
Yeah, exactly. Are there any questions, comments specifically to Tania and this study? Reflections?
Thank you so much for the presentation. I wanted to ask, so obviously there is a need for pathways designed specifically for heritage language speakers at your university, and are there any possibilities, not possibilities, opportunities of doing this in the near future?
Okay, we hope so. There will be some opportunity. I know that in some universities, they are already organizing some specific courses for heritage. This is not a course, but they are sort of, as we can, counseling. Can we say that? Counseling. So sometimes, considering the fact that we have very few students learning Russian as a heritage speaker at the moment. So they organize in some universities some counseling,
tutoring, maybe
moment.
Tutoring,
yes,
tutoring.
tutoring. Thank you, Irina. Tutoring moments, so specifically dedicated to the students. So they still follow mixed classes, but if they are in need of some other information or some more in-depth analysis, they go to this tutoring. Some universities in Italy just start doing that, and it's quite good. I think it's quite good.
And
really appreciate.
May I follow up with a question about how they're placed? So if, because you mentioned at the beginning, the success of mixed classes, as research shows, depends on how close in their oral proficiency, the two types of
yeah.
So are they normally, if a heritage speaker cannot read or write, do they go to the beginning level course? Is that what happens normally?
Yes, unfortunately, when we have this mixed classroom, they start from the very first, for the first year, and they are mixed together with students starting from zero. starting Russian from zero. So it is a great problem indeed, because they believe they are skipped most of the times, and they cannot in a certain way they have not the opportunity to improve their knowledge, of course, because we are as teachers much more concentrated on the ones that are starting from the zero. Sometimes it's good because we ask these students, these heritage speakers, we have good fluency of Russian. Maybe they have some problems from the grammatical point of view, of course, but good fluency. So we ask them to help us doing some jobs, we organize some activities in mixed groups, small groups, and so they can be of help, but not for everything, of course. Not for everything.
Any other comments, questions? Well, in that case, perhaps we could move on to the next presentation, and if we have time at the end, then we can discuss all of the 3 presentations. Yes, Liana, I second your Zoom gesture. So our second presentation, I will switch to Russian because it's the title of the presentation is in Russian. So, добро пожаловать, Мария Сулимова, Лейпцигский университет и университет Wuppertal, Германия, межпредметные и межъязыковые связи на уроках русского языка как родного, эритажного в немецкой школе.
Большое спасибо, дорогие коллеги. Мне очень приятно принимать участие в вашей конференции, и для меня большая честь сегодня выступать с этим докладом. Я немножко представлюсь. Я точно так же, как и итальянские коллеги, работаю на славистике Лейпцигского университета и преподаю точно так же в гетерогенных группах русский язык, с одной стороны, а с другой стороны я постдок университета Вупперталя, и там работаю на кафедре билингвизм в школе, и мы занимаемся исследованиями того, как дети-билингвы учатся в немецкой школе. И, в частности, мое исследование посвящено урокам русского языка как родного. Как выглядит структура моей презентации? Сначала я скажу пару вводных замечаний о теме, потом расскажу о том, как устроены уроки эритажных языков в Германии, представлю свое исследование, результаты и заключения. Дети, говорящие на русском языке, которые являются немецкими школьниками, они, конечно, растут в ситуации многоязычия, и они в своей повседневной жизни используют немецкий, английский и свои родные языки, например, русский или другие языки. При этом есть исследования, которые показывают, что компетенции, которые есть в одном языке, могут переноситься в другой, а выстраивание таких транслингвальных связей на занятиях языком положительно влияет на уровень владения всеми языками. То есть сказывается положительно и на родном языке, и на немецком, и на остальных языках тоже. В Германии были проведены пилотные проекты, задачей которых было координировать развитие языковых компетенций в разных языках параллельно, и они показали, что трансфер вот этих языковых навыков и развитие металингвистических компетенций очень продуктивны, и особенно эффективной оказалась работа с жанрами при написании текстов. Точно так же учебный план по эритажным языкам рекомендует учителям выстраивать межпредметные и межъязыковые связи и повышать металингвистические компетенции учеников. Но в то же время очень мало есть исследований о том, как практически это реализуется на занятиях и как учителя решают эту задачу методически. Теперь я скажу пару слов об уроках эритажных языков в Германии. Вообще в Германии вопросы образования решаются на уровне каждой отдельной земли, соответственно, поскольку земель 16, есть 16 разных решений того, как преподаются языки, и эта карта показывает, как эти решения распределены по языкам. Голубым отмечены те земли, в которых внутри государственных школ преподаются в какой-то форме родные языки, оранжевым те земли, где родные языки преподаются на базе консульств, и эти занятия засчитываются школами, и, соответственно, серым отмечены те земли, где вообще нет никакого преподавания родных языков. Всего, по официальным данным, в 2021 году около 140 тысяч учеников посещали занятия в школах по родному языку. Я сразу скажу, речь идет именно о школьных занятиях, не занятиях воскресных школ или субботних школ, а именно на базе школ. И очень, значит, в основной задачей таких занятий видится расширение навыков владения родным языком в устной и письменной форме. Очень долго подчеркивалось, что главное – это чтобы дети овладели литературным языком во всей его, так сказать, широте. Но в последнее время исследователи подчеркивают, что и общее развитие речи – это тоже важная задача таких занятий. Ну, а поскольку языковые навыки очень разные вследствие того, что дети растут в разных социолингвистических ситуациях и получают разный опыт, конечно, знания учеников, они тоже очень гетерогенны. Теперь пару слов о моем исследовании. Я провожу квалитативное исследование, эксплоративное, исследую, как учителя подходят к обучению написания текстов своих учеников. И в рамках этого исследования я провожу интервью с экспертами, с учителями и анализирую их с помощью содержательного квалитативного анализа. И на основе анализа формулирую категории. Всего я провела 10 интервью за последних 3 года, и вот вы видите, какой у них объем. Мои информанты – это учителя, которые преподают русский как эритажный. 7 из них преподают в земле Северной Рейн-Вестфалии, а 3 в Саксонии. У них очень разный стаж, от 1 до 28 лет, и у большинства из них филологическое, лингвистическое или педагогическое образование. Вот на этом слайде вы видите, как бы все учителя представлены под псевдонимами. Вы, пробежав быстро глазами, увидите, что и большинство из них либо филологи, либо лингвисты, и они из самых разных стран бывшего Советского Союза. В то же время я должна сказать, что... Вы меня слышите? Да, хорошо. В то же время в Германии только в одном университете с прошлого года можно получить официальный диплом преподавателя языка как родного или эритажного. То есть все эти учителя, они не имеют немецкого образования педагогического. Земля Северной Рейн-Вестфалии считается таким образцово-показательным примером того, как можно интегрировать преподавание родных языков. У них очень давняя традиция, и эритажные языки там преподаются с 60-х годов. Там много разных языков, и дети изучают систематически свой родной язык с 1 по 10 класс вместо 2 иностранного. Соответственно, в аттестат заносятся оценки, и в 10 классе они сдают государственный экзамен школьный. И таким образом получается, что есть относительно стабильная группа детей, которые в начальной школе начинают изучать язык и доходят до 10 класса. Совсем другая ситуация в Саксонии. Там эритажные языки стали преподавать с 2008 года. Языков тоже немало, 18, но учителя работают на почасовых контрактах, и эти контракты каждый год как бы заново продлеваются. И язык родной является факультативом, то есть оценки никакой нет, просто в аттестат заносится отметка о том, что ребенок посещал эти занятия, и из-за этого очень много детей после начальной школы бросают занятия, просто потому что растет сильно нагрузка в основной школе, и они уже у них не получается совмещать. В рамках сегодняшней презентации я хочу ответить на вопрос, в каких ситуациях учителя русского как родного проводят межязыковые и межпредметные параллели на своих уроках. И хочу рассказать о следующих категориях, которые я выявила на основании интервью. Ну, во-первых, важно отметить, что сама программа предписывает проведение таких связей с другими языками, с другими предметами. И в то же время учителя, когда говорят об этом интервью, они, во-первых, ссылаются на программу, а во-вторых, они говорят, что их опыт показывает, что есть какие-то отсылки, которые очень хорошо работают и помогают им интересно строить, эффективно строить занятия. Ну и в первую очередь, конечно же, это обучение немецкому языку. Для меня, значит, дальше на моих слайдах будет много цитат, но я не скажу из того, что вы все успеете прочитать, я вкратце расскажу, о чем говорят учителя. Во-первых, учителя при обучении грамоте, обучении письму, они синхронизируются с немецкой программой. Они знают, в какой момент в немецкой школе дети учатся читать, потом в какой момент учатся писать печатные буквы, учатся писать письменные. И для того, чтобы эффективно использовать время, как правило, они следуют за немецкой программой. То есть многие учителя сначала учат детей читать, как это делают в немецкой школе, и после того, когда уже отработан навык чтения, они начинают понемногу осваивать письменные буквы. Точно так же и знание эксплицитной грамматики. они тоже синхронизируют с немецкой программой. При этом важно отметить, что вообще в немецкой школе грамматики намного меньше, чем это традиционно было в русскоязычных школах. Но, тем не менее, теоретическое знание учителя вводят, как бы синхронизируясь, подстраиваясь под немецкую программу. И говорят, например, что раньше 4 класса нет смысла детям объяснять, что такое падежи, потому что пусть они сначала это пройдут. Ну, к счастью, в немецком языке, к счастью, для них в немецком языке есть падежи. Они говорят, пусть сначала дети теоретически узнают, как это работает на примере немецкого языка, и после этого мы подхватываем и дальше уже углубляем, потому что, конечно, русский язык дальше, ну, как бы без падежей никак, а в немецкой школе, на самом деле, на этом знакомство с падежами и заканчивается, то есть дальше ими особенно никто не занимается. Важную роль, очень часто параллели учителя проводят с ними занятиями немецким языком, когда они с учениками осваивают какие-то жанры. Например, когда они учатся писать письмо. И вот учительница Дина говорит, что они это уже к тому моменту, когда она занимается этим на своих уроках, они это уже проходили на занятиях немецким, и она просит приносить примеры с уроков немецкого языка, и она говорит, давайте мы вместе посмотрим, будем вместе переводить, и, может быть, сравним, что подходит для русского языка, что не подходит, какая структура у письма должна быть. Точно так же другая учительница, Олеся, она преподает в Северном районе Вестфалии, и там в выпускном экзамене детям нужно писать сочинение в форме аргументации. И она говорит, что в общем, в принципе, этому и не нужно их учить, потому что их этому учат уже в немецкой школе. Они уже очень хорошо знают, какая структура у этой аргументации. То есть, по сути, я просто дублирую на русском языке. И для того и существует наша программа, чтобы мы знали, какие вещи можно параллелить, и чтобы дети одновременно проходили эти вещи на родном языке и на немецком. С литературой немного сложнее, потому что литература, конечно, проходится другая на уроках немецкого языка, и некоторые учителя говорят, что они действительно перенимают и подходы, и ту прогрессию, которая следует в немецкой школе. Есть учителя, которые проводят даже межкультурные параллели. Например, вот дети в немецкой школе в 4 классе читают басни, и она помимо русских басен приносит еще им и немецкие, и французские, и на латыни, и показывает, что вот как бы широкий спектр басен на разных языках с переводом. Но вообще большинство учителей говорят, что у них нет, они не знают о том, как выстроено преподавание литературы в немецкой школе, и для них очень сложно поэтому как-то ориентироваться на немецкую программу. Вообще они очень хотели бы это узнать, но, к сожалению, таких курсов для них нет. И, как правило, они знания об этом черпают из какого-то другого опыта, ну, например, как из знаний о том, как их дети проходят в школе. Когда учителя объясняют, почему они связывают свои занятия как-то с немецким языком, во-первых, они говорят, что есть уже знание, которое эксплицитное, например, грамматическое, на которое мы можем опираться, есть сформированные навыки, на которые мы можем опираться, а также они отмечают, что отсылки к немецкому языку повышают мотивацию детей. И вот, например, учительница Рената говорит, что она все время объясняет детям, то, что мы сейчас с вами проходим, вам потом понадобится и на немецком языке, или вам, в принципе, понадобится на немецком языке. А другая учительница, Олеся, говорит, что она часто обгоняет по теории немецкую программу, и потом у детей случается маленькое счастье, и они себя чувствуют экспертами и очень этим довольны. В таксонии, в отличие от Северного района Вестфалии, у родного языка, занятий родного языка статус факультатива, но при этом в саксонских школах русский язык преподается как иностранный. И одна из учительниц, Наталья, рассказывает, что часть ее учеников ходит на эти уроки русского как иностранного, и для нее это играет очень хорошую роль, потому что с тех пор, как она считает, что это очень хорошо, потому что когда дети начинают получать официальные оценки, они сразу начинают значительно больше времени уделять грамматике и орфографии, потому что до этого мотивировать их учить орфографические правила ей очень сложно, оказывается. Какими другими еще предметами учителя проводят параллели? В начальной школе учителя отсылают к урокам окружающего мира. Ирина, это учительница из Саксонии, она говорит, что ее программа по родному языку, она очень объемная, и она действительно включает не только преподавание языка, но и окружающий мир. И Ирина, что интересно, тоже берет те темы, которые рассматривают дети на уроках окружающего мира по-немецки. Ну, например, вот она рассказывает, как они рассматривают листья с детьми, делают проект, осенью посвященный разным деревьям. И это очень четкая параллель есть в плане по окружающему миру соответствующего класса. И другая учительница говорит, что вообще она все свои занятия по русскому языку организует в рамках подхода CLIL, потому что ей кажется, что это для детей как бы эффективнее, и у них больше расширяется словарный запас, им это интереснее. В средней школе учителя рассказывают о том, что они проводят параллели на предметах, с предметами такими, как география и история. И по географии, как бы, с одной стороны, это является частью программы по языку, включающей страноведение, но в то же время те темы, которые она называет, ну, например, европейские системы гор или европейские реки, это тоже темы, которые есть в немецкой программе по географии. Вот. А с историей, наоборот, та учительница, которая занимается с детьми историей, она отмечает, что для нее это бывает проблема, потому что часто то, о чем бы она хотела поговорить на предмете истории России, этого, наоборот, дети не проходят в школе и не проходят аналогичные периоды из истории Германии, поэтому для нее это скорее является проблемой. То есть она хотела бы, и она что-то рассказывает, но тогда ей приходится еще и рассказывать детям об истории Германии. И такой лейтмотив в этих интервью, при том, что учителя проводят постоянно рассказывают много о параллелях, которые они проводят, они говорят, что мы варимся в собственном соку. Почему? Дело в том, что действительно до сих пор в Германии нет никаких официальных курсов по образованию собственно, по получению вот этой квалификации учителей родного языка. И многие учителя опираются на свой личный опыт. Например, Олеся рассказывает, что ей тот факт, что у нее есть свои дети, которые закончили школу, которые когда-то ходили на такие языки, помогло ей как бы осмыслить и продумать эти параллели с другими предметами, но это ее сугубо личный опыт. И точно так же другая учительница Наталья с Саксонии рассказывает историю, что как-то раз ее даже попросили заменить занятия в школе по русскому как иностранному. Ей это было очень интересно, потому что она обрадовалась и поняла, что есть возможность посмотреть, наконец, как происходит учебный процесс. Вот. Но директору при этом это очень не понравилось, и она не видела в этом никакого смысла. С другой стороны, учителя ее поддержали и дали ей такую возможность. Но вот эта позиция директора, она, конечно, удивляет, в особенности, что человек и так работает в системе образования и преподает русский язык. В целом, сравнивая эти две земли, можно сказать, что в Северном Рейне-Вестфалии дети дольше ходят на русский язык с 1 по 10 класс, и до этого учителя, видимо, из-за этого учителя называют больше тем пересечений с уроком немецкого языка. То, что учителя работают с жанрами, возможно, это пример вошбек-эффекта, потому что выпускной экзамен в 10 классе связан именно с умением написать тексты в разных жанрах, и, возможно, поэтому этот фокус и параллели с немецким языком, они больше напрашиваются. Ну и также учителя рассказывают о том, что они проводят параллели с такими предметами, как литература и история. В таксонии уроки происходят преимущественно в начальной школе, и учителя отмечают высокую текучесть учеников. И в интервью, соответственно, они тоже рассказывают о параллелях, но больше акцент делают на обучение грамоте, первым навыкам письма и эксплицитным грамматическим знаниям, ну и, соответственно, больше рассказывают о параллелях, которые они проводят с таким уроком, как окружающий мир. Ну и в заключение я хотела бы представить свои выводы. Получается, что учителя при планировании и проведении уроков опираются на содержание не только уроков немецкого языка, но и других предметов, и отсылают также к другим языкам. Я не приводила примеры, но есть учителя, которые действительно проводят параллели межязыковые, повышая тем самым металингвистические компетенции. Те учителя опираются на то грамматическое эксплицитное знание, которое дети получают на уроках немецкого языка, и акцентируют внимание на разных аспектах дополнительно, а также графомоторика, жанры и какой-то стилистический анализ. Учителя отмечают, что знания о немецком языке и о других языках повышают языковую осознанность, но в то же время им сложно проводить литературные параллели. Для учителей очень важно, что связь с общеобразовательной программой поддерживает мотивацию учеников, которые ходят к ним на уроки. И в целом учителя отмечают, что у них есть потребность в систематическом повышении квалификации для того, чтобы более эффективно преподавать и применять вот эти самые межязыковые, проводить межязыковые параллели. Ну и кроме того, очень большой важной темой это являются сами условия учебного процесса, которые не всегда оптимально организованы. Это усложняет внедрение идей и концепций, которые могли бы сделать их уроки лучше. Но как бы мы надеемся с коллегами, что сможем как-то, возможно, что-то разработать курсы повышения квалификации и помочь им с этим. Спасибо большое за внимание.
Спасибо огромное за очень интересную презентацию. Коллеги, пожалуйста, если у вас есть вопросы, комментарии, дополнения.
Можно?
Пожалуйста,
У меня
Диана.
вопрос. Да, добрый вечер. Я из Армении, представляю Ереванский государственный университет. Спасибо, Мария, за интересный доклад. У меня один вопрос, может быть, я прослушала, вы меня подправите. Я правильно поняла, что нет единой программы по русскому языку, то есть каждая школа сама решает, или точнее, то есть это все на учителя, да, то есть каждый конкретный учитель индивидуально решает, в каком классе какая ситуация с другими предметами, да, опираются больше на немецкую программу, то есть нет какого-то формуляра, то есть единой программы для родного языка, да, нет?
Значит, единая программа есть, но они разные в разных землях, и эта единая программа, она сформулирована для всех языков, которые преподаются. То есть есть общая программа, и в рамках нее преподают русский, турецкий, арабский, вьетнамский, все-все-все языки. И вследствие этого она сформулирована очень-очень-очень в общих чертах. То есть
Да,
максимально.
поэтому, наверное, такой хаос, да, возникает в связи с тем,
Да.
что не может быть, наверное, единой программы для всех языков, да, скорее всего, поэтому.
Да, конечно. Но это именно по урокам русского как родного, потому что
Да.
русский как иностранный, по нему, конечно, есть четкая программа.
Да, спасибо.
Пожалуйста, Ричард.
Такой вопрос. Вы сказали, что очень многое в грамматике можно базировать на знаниях немецкого языка, то есть на родном языке. Насколько они хорошо знают немецкую грамматику, и любой американец или любой человек, который преподает в Америке, прекрасно понимает подоплеку моего вопроса.
Ну, скажем так, в начальной немецкой школе некое общее теоретическое знание грамматики есть. То есть, например, в 4 классе детям рассказывают, что в немецком языке есть падежи, и если их поискать, то их можно найти. Вот. Но, к сожалению, в принципе, поскольку для того, чтобы писать на немецком языке, не нужно разбираться в падежах, да, это грамматическое знание. То есть последний раз дети о падежах слышат в 7 классе, и это действительно слышат, то есть они не подробно разбирают. Вот. Но, тем не менее, видимо, то, что эта информация как-то звучит, это таки помогает учителям планировать свои занятия.
Спасибо.
А в продолжение этого вопроса, а как насчет понятия категории рода и согласования?
Род, мне кажется, кстати, хороший вопрос. Мне кажется, что род как категория в нем, им в немецкой школе не занимаются, но он есть, в принципе, да, то есть в немецком языке тоже 3 рода. Вот, а согласование уже, да, вот уже согласование это только то, чему можно научить на уроках родного языка, и что уже не актуально для немецкого языка. Да.
Но они концептуально все-таки знают, я думаю, что они формируют имплицитно эту категорию, это не проблема для них. Все-таки.
Но это бывает интересно, когда разный род, вследствие интерференции дети путаются, да, в русском языке.
Конечно.
Да, пожалуйста, Лиана.
У меня тоже вопрос. Вот ситуация в земле Северной Рейн-Вестфалия выглядит образцовой. Хотелось бы узнать об общей ситуации в Германии. Вот эта земля, она является исключением в плане преподавания русского как родного. И как вообще выглядит ситуация в Германии?
В принципе, в Германии все очень по-разному в разных землях. И есть несколько земель, в которых действительно есть возможность изучать родной язык вот, как замену иностранному, продолжительно в течение нескольких лет. Помимо Северного Рейна-Вестфалии это Баден-Вюртемберг, Рейнланд-Пфальц, да, Рейнланд-Пфальц, Гамбург, и также 2 года как в земле Саар, это такая земля на границе с Францией, вот, в них есть вот эти систематические курсы по родным языкам с 1 класса по 10. При этом, например, в земле Гамбург сейчас языки можно изучать с средней школы вместо второго. То есть второй иностранный обычно изучают с 5 или 6 класса. И вот в земле Гамбург они решили, что теперь дети, они это больше не называют иностранным языком, они называют современными языками. И дети, соответственно, могут выбрать либо иностранный современный язык, либо родной, и также его изучать. В землях, ну как Берлин, тут некоторые исключения. Дело в том, что в Берлине русский традиционно еще с времен ГДР изучается как традиционный второй иностранный язык, но в этих группах практически все дети, которые сейчас занимаются, они практически все, у них русский язык родной. То есть тоже получается гетерогенные группы с очень большим количеством детей, у которых он родной. А так на территории бывшей Восточной Германии родной язык можно изучать в остальных землях как факультатив, то есть не как обязательная программа.
Мария, нам в США остается только завидовать. Вот, даже тем землям, которые не образцово-показательные, нам остается только завидовать. Я не знаю, Таня, в Италии есть ли преподавание русского языка в школах или как родного, как наследственного?
Насколько я знаю, в Италии есть вот такие курсы, да? Извиняюсь. Есть вот такие курсы, да, организованные для билингвов, скажем. В Вероне тоже есть вот такие курсы, организованные для билингвов, где вот эти вот ученики вот продолжают изучаться, продолжают изучать, говорят по-русски или пишут вот такие специальные курсы для них, чтобы они не забили русский язык. Вот такие существуют. Но это вот отдельные курсы, которые организуются вне школы, не в школах, скажем.
Да, это
Специально
ситуация в
организованы.
США, да, это community-based schools, да.
Да. Community-based курс, окей. Вот так.
Спасибо большое. Еще раз, Мария, спасибо, Таня, за этот комментарий. И теперь мы переходим к третьей презентации, and I'm switching to English because we will be speaking in English since we work on this topic in English, and it just ends up being easier for us to speak in English on this topic. So I will introduce both of us. There are 2 presenters on the third topic, and it's heritage language pedagogy towards a research-based account. And it's just great the way it worked out that our paper comes as a third in this panel. I think it ties up nicely the themes, the topics that Tania and Maria raised. So I'm Irina Dubinina. I'm from the Brandeis University, and my dear colleague Olesya Kisselev, University of South Carolina. And Olesya will begin, and then I will continue this presentation. So Olesya, you can start. Let me just share, and then you can
and in the meanwhile, I will also echo Irina's thanks to the previous presenters, because this is like in a number of places on the slide. So we will have to imagine that I'm adding your names to some of the points that we're raising, and I do want to say that I would like to see both of these papers in whatever forms they exist right now, whether as slides or hopefully you're preparing them for publication. So I would like to see and read your research a bit more carefully, and definitely include them in our further thinking about heritage language pedagogy towards a research-based account. So Irina and I have sort of worked on this idea of developing instructional approaches based on what it is that we actually know about heritage languages in general, and Russian heritage languages more specifically. For a while. So there, our general premise here is to create approaches that are evidence-based, that are based in our experiences, as well as that thorough research that we are all doing today, and examples of which we saw in the previous presentations. So our general idea is that heritage language pedagogy overall, and certainly heritage language pedagogy for Russian, stands to benefit from a thorough understanding of at least these three general aspects of heritage language knowledge. That is the linguistic processes and kind of the nature of heritage language that shape HL acquisition and shape HL use. We also consider that understanding specific linguistic lacunas that characterize a particular HL is very, very important. More importantly, or in addition to sort of understanding, the specific linguistic lacunas of Russian heritage speakers, we also want to make sure that we understand specific linguistic lacunas of, for example, Russian German heritage speakers, Russian English heritage speakers, Russian Israeli heritage speakers, because these will differ. And so we need to be fine-tuning our approaches based on what it is that we know about these specific HL dyads. And of course, we also need to account for very special and unique sociocultural backgrounds of our speakers. We just heard about this very specific situation in Germany. And even as we are now learning in Germany, that a social background in terms of language exposure, in terms of language heritage, language maintenance is different from one land to another. What is земля in English? From one part of Germany to another, right? So we also, of course, want to account for learning histories of each learner who ends up in our classroom and their learning needs. This is where, I would like to thank Tania and her colleagues for doing such an important job in really trying to understand the motivations of heritage learners, because I think we think that addressing those particular motivations and their unique needs will really serve us best. So in response to these factors that I cited now on the previous slide, we propose the following general principles of heritage language pedagogy. And, yes, we think about Russian heritage learners most and foremost, but we also think that these apply to heritage language pedagogies in more general terms. But what we see for our field specifically, we do need to focus on linguistic form. And I'm glad that we're here in very good company, because we sometimes sort of argue with our colleagues in other languages who do not consider linguistic form to be a very important pursuit in heritage language education. We also advocate for teaching very contemporary language and a variety of genres, which is where learning about Maria's teachers really warms my heart, seeing how teachers kind of intuitively address this question of variety of genres in their teaching. And and I wonder if this is a very particular circumstance for Russian heritage pedagogy, where we often see that kind of over-reliance on classical texts. And Irina and I suggest that we certainly need to not necessarily abandon Russian classical literature, but definitely expand on the genre variety and include a lot more modern genres and different types of texts into our teaching. We also think that a systematic approach to teaching heritage languages needs to support the general idea of biculturalism, what this is, or even multiculturalism, as we see with many of our European colleagues. You often work with learners who maintain not only 2, but 3 and even 4 languages in the environment. So actively supporting multicultural identities in the classroom is highly important. And because we normally see our heritage learners only for a short period of time, sometimes for a year, sometimes a couple of years, the idea is that we need to teach them specific strategies for maintaining their heritage languages beyond the classroom. So these sort of general principles of pedagogy are, of course, or the division between them is somewhat artificial. We separated them for the sake of discussion, but they are naturally interrelated. They feed into one another, and hopefully represent this mutually supported ecosystem, if you will. And in today's presentation, we'll mostly think and focus on this idea of attending to linguistic form. Attention to linguistic form, as I mentioned, is a somewhat contentious idea in heritage language pedagogy, maybe not so much for Russian heritage language pedagogy, but certainly even within our field, we are still on this path of persuading more and more people that this is a worthy pursuit in our classrooms, and the grammar is something that we need to pay explicit attention to in our classes, and that general attention to linguistic form is comprised of course, a number of different aspects, of which we would like to point out these 3. That attention to linguistic form is comprised of ability of learners to notice and analyze forms in the input and kind of map the forms to the meaning, whether implicitly or explicitly or through a combination of both. That leads to ideally to that development of grammatical concept or a more conceptual understanding of grammar and how grammar is meaningful and contributes to the creation of meaning. And of course, all of that contributes highly to the development of metalinguistic awareness. And of course, in turn, metalinguistic awareness contributes to all these other skills that are pointed out on this slide. There's plenty of research in the field of SLA and the field of HLA, heritage language acquisition, that point to or that provide evidence behind these ideas. We know, for example, from a good amount of research right now, mostly from experimental linguistics and psycholinguistic research, that shows that HL speakers, and by the way, it also is true for L2 speakers, they do not focus on inflections, for example, which are paramount to understanding, to developing grammatical abilities in Russian language. And so they do not form these connections or mappings between the linguistic form and the meaning that they signify. So that in turn sort of leads to these restructured grammars that we often notice in heritage learners. We have seen in much of research that noticing and explicit analysis of form can help our learners to, again, notice these forms in the input, and kind of begin to form conceptual understanding of grammar and then develop better linguistic skills. There's plenty of research out there that suggests that appropriate grammatical form actually depends on the formation of concepts. And we need to provide our learners with specific tools to describe the language, which is something that it appears that Russian teachers in Germany are actually working on, which again is a great thing to hear. And that awareness and attention to learning is contributing to metalinguistic awareness, which again in turn contributes to noticing and grammatical skill. So we'll now sort of talk about how to practically or in reality realize these abstract notions in our classrooms.
And that's where I take over and continue the presentation, so we can show you examples of how we propose we could do this in the classroom. Of course, there is no panacea, there is no silver bullet, there is no one answer. These are just examples that we thought of and that we also used in the textbook for heritage, an introductory course for heritage language learners that Olesya and I co-authored. And so we're happy to share this thinking in hopes that we can engage in a dialogue and then improve and develop these further. So how to develop attention to form through noticing. Our heritage language learners, HLLs on the slide, come to our classrooms already with some native speaker intuitions. They already have some knowledge of how the language works. What they need is guidance and support in analyzing what they know and what they see in the input that we provide them, so that they could perhaps even reanalyze their knowledge and discover linguistic patterns. We could give our learners language samples that illustrate the use of a particular structure that we're focusing on, guiding them to notice the connection between the grammatical form and its meaning. We could create activities that reveal complexities of form meaning correspondences, so that they notice, for example, optionality of linguistic expression, and they notice subtlety of form meaning correspondence in both written and oral speech. And then we can engage them in explicit comparisons of features that we're focusing on, both across the languages that they know and within their heritage language, so that they can notice differences between the two languages, similarities and differences, but crucially differences, and that so that they could notice language internal variations. So, for example, this is what we mean by providing linguistic data for analysis and guiding learners through discovering the connection between the form and the meaning, especially in the written form for Russian. So imagine we're talking about the indirect object of a verb. How do we correctly say and write this in Russian? So we can provide a lot of examples that help learners notice the patterns. Джону часто скучно на лекциях по истории. Кому часто скучно? Профессору было приятно получить письмо. Кому было приятно? Ребенку трудно объяснить. Кому трудно объяснить? And so on and so forth. So lots of examples of the masculine pattern, consistent examples for them to notice the pattern and to build the hypothesis of how masculine words would work in this situation. Then we can switch to the feminine pattern. Then we could add feminine that ends in iya and third declension, feminine nouns, etc. And then this would be the first step, right? So using the existing linguistic intuitions of our learners, providing them with a guide as to how to analyze these patterns, highlight the form meaning connections, and then through exercises help our learners adjust their linguistic knowledge and their linguistic intuitions, because we know that when they're not sure of the endings, and when they scramble, they just choose whatever they choose, and we can help them adjust they're thinking about how they should approach assigning endings. Noticing complexity of form and meaning mapping, so optionality is the first thing that we could work with, because of the contexts in which our learners acquire the language, which are normally informal contexts. And there are going to be variations between informal contexts and formal prescribed preferences. There will also be regional differences. And so we can talk about what is said, what is prescribed. We can talk about two forms being equal in their distribution. We could talk about pragmatic consequences of the choice of one form over another. And here are just some examples. Когда я был маленький, когда я был маленьким. What will native speakers prefer in different situations, the nominative or the instrumental in this cases? Олин computer, computer Oli. What are the sociopragmatic consequences of choosing one of these forms? Трое детей, три ребенка. What are the genre consequences of these choices? And then the pragmatic example of which construction do you use to request for a favor? And what do the different options mean for your relationship with the person to whom you're addressing with this request? Noticing subtlety of form meaning mapping, here we really can highlight how the written modality of the language is different from the oral modality of the language. So this is one example. In oral speech, we should not hear the difference in the ending, but what a huge difference in meaning when you see it in writing, and what consequences for meaning the choice of the right or wrong ending has. Right? It's a difference between a very good boyfriend and not a boyfriend at all, or a bad boyfriend. Explicit comparisons, again, cross-linguistic, but also within the language. Cross-linguistic, here is one example of the structure that we should really work on with our heritage learners, and that's the indefinite personal constructions. English requires an overt subject in these instances, whereas Russian requires not to use an overt subject. And noticing these differences is very important, and they're very subtle differences. Language internal comparisons are equally important, and here we are highlighting the different meanings of the two prepositions v and na, and which are associated with expressing location and as well as direction. But then this specific example is also great because it helps us bring in cross-linguistic comparisons. So we can show that English is very consistent in this marking, and sometimes it can change the preposition to indicate location versus direction, or it may use the same preposition. Moving on to conceptual understanding of grammar, of course, as Olesya already said, the previous examples all contribute to the formulation of concept, the concept of case, the concept that case is marked with inflections, the meaningfulness of these inflections, of these imperceptible units of the language. But then there are also concepts that are so complex that building patterns and guiding through analysis perhaps is a little bit harder. And so here perhaps we need to engage in explicit explanations of concepts, and verbs of motion is one such category. And here we can provide explanations in the dominant language of the heritage learner. We can use pictures, especially if pictures involve humor. That is always great to support learners again walk them through developing this conceptual understanding. And I want to underscore that this applies not only to grammar but also to lexicon, to vocabulary. So for example, here we are focusing on building this concept that young in English could be referred to both children and adults, whereas Russian separates that concept. It's either маленькие дети or молодые люди, and these are two different concepts. And finally, developing metalinguistic awareness. First and foremost, our students are bilinguals. In Europe, trilinguals and quadrilinguals, and maybe more. And so they're used in their communities, in their speech communities, which sometimes is only their home, only their immediate family. They're used to code switching, to bilingual mode of communication. They may not even perceive this as code switching. They may think that lawyer is a normal Russian word for heritage learners living in the United States. So tasks that engage our learners in noticing those code switched items and replacing them with the appropriate Russian equivalent is a good way to engage them in this metacognitive analysis of translanguaging, of code switching, and understanding that this kind of translanguaging will only work with other bilinguals and will not work with monolinguals if they want to speak, or bilinguals for whom the other language, the second language is a different second language from the ones our heritage learners have. But also metalinguistic awareness could be developed using our learners' native speaker knowledge or intuition. And because even without formal explicit education, our learners understand intuitively how prefixation and suffixation works in Russian. They can engage in this kind of linguistic play where we give them a root from a different language and ask them to produce forms in Russian using prefixation and suffixation. And these are actual legitimate words in the Russian language. And I'm finishing up with just a few caveats to this. We advocate focusing on form, but of course it needs to happen in context. Like grammar, teaching grammar for the sake of grammar does not get us to where our learners want to go. They want to have their language to talk to their family members, to talk to their children, perhaps to use it at work. And so, of course, we need to be mindful of the context in which we work with these form-focused activities. Their bilingual, bicultural identities need to be attended to. And it is necessary to do some identity work and built-in community connections. All of these will foster our learners' motivations to stay on task. And wrapping up and kind of going back to what Olesya said at the beginning. So these are our proposed principle of heritage language education. And we want to highlight the fact that when we engage in teaching heritage learners, we need to remember that they are not the same as second language learners. They are also not the same as monolingual learners. They are unique, and we need to draw on experiences and knowledge base from both disciplines, monolingual kind of language arts education and SLA. We need to keep in mind that conceptual understanding may happen fast, but automatization takes time. And so we often become frustrated with ourselves and our learners because we think that, we covered this so well, we worked on it so much, and yet there are still mistakes, errors. It will take time. And we have to focus on issues that are relative to our students' context and experiences. We need to understand why they are in the classroom. And we also need to differentiate between categorical conceptual issues and conventional mechanical issues. So, for example, if our learners do not use punctuation correctly, how crucial is that, considering that they have larger problems such as gender reassignment categories and kind of a reduction, sometimes dramatic reduction in case repertoires? Thank you for listening to our presentation, and I'm going to stop my timer here and stop sharing so that we can take questions.
So my question, big philosophical question that sort of touches on some of the things you said about lexicon. One of my big problems with heritage speakers is the word Klasse. And I struggle with Americans, I struggle with Klasse, but they get it eventually after 2 or 3 years. The heritage speakers get it in Klasse. And the moment they walk out that door, there's no more урок, no more seminar, no more преподавание. It's all класс. So how important is it to do this one? There are a lot of other little lexical battles like this. How important are these lexical battles? Because half the native speakers, not херитажники, native speakers come over here and within 10 years, it's all класс. So what are we to do? I have a big, I'm now working on a heritage book with Tania Kisselev, the second edition of Russian for Russians. And this is a philosophical issue that we have. I have it more than she does. She's not bothered by it. I'm bothered by it. So what's your take?
Yeah, I can jump in quickly, and then Olesya, you can, I see that you want to say as well.
Yeah.
So a number of thoughts, and this is a stream of consciousness. So number one, our heritage speakers tend to stay with us for a very short period of time. Most of them take our course, one course maybe for heritage speakers, they leave the program, whereas our L2 learners usually stay with us for a while, and you said after 2 years they get it. Number two, what I said on the last slide, that we need to be careful or mindful of the context in which they live. And class, worse, брать классы, to take classes, has become a norm. This is what their parents say. And so, yes, perhaps this is a battle, like pick your battles. Perhaps this is not a battle you want to fight, Richard. Olesya?
So this is one of the things that we are proposing also in our textbook and in a number of papers that we published, is the idea of awareness, genre awareness, but also register awareness. So we don't have the sort of answer to our learners, this is how you say it in Russian, right? Our answer to our learners usually is, let's see how people in the mainland use this phrase or this word, people in the community, which is why we insist that we also need to look at, diasporic use of the Russian language. So as long as they are aware of these differences, so if I go to, or if I speak to my grandma who's not as exposed to the bilingual variety of Russian or the more kind of anglicized variety of Russian, I will have to be, a little more particular about choosing my words. If I'm talking to people who are bilinguals themselves, I'm free to use the phrases that have become a norm in the diasporic variety of the language. I truly believe that this is about sort of fostering that awareness about registered differences and about the differences in a linguistic variety.
Thank you for the question. Natalia?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Irina and Olesya, for a wonderful presentation. If you don't mind, I would like to comment first to Richard's question, and then I have a question for you too. Richard, I'm absolutely with you on class.
Thank you.
Because I am bothered as well. But Olesya, I understand what you're saying, how important it is for them. My problem with class is what Richard said. They get it while they're in the classroom, but as soon as they leave, their procedural knowledge which they have already established, kicks in. And because I study cognitive processing, and I'm going to talk about it at the last round table tomorrow, if you're interested. But I think what's important, Olesya, is I probably think is when they want to get it. When they don't want to get it is different, but then when they want to get it and can't get it because their procedural memory just keeps kicking in, that's when they need to develop the strategies. How do I get it?
Sure. Yeah, and we work a lot on proceduralization. So one of the biggest kind of proposals for our pedagogical approach is systematic work on automatization of the skill. Mm-hmm. So there is absolutely no getting out of it. You're right. They've internalized many of these phrases, and it's the same with grammar. So and Richard, this is where, the unsolicited advice from a practitioner kicks in. Like the more practical exercises you can give us on practicing the skill that you're suggesting that we're working on, the better. I think this is key, both in L2 and L1 and heritage language, to really work on kind of rewiring, as it were, and building the new neural paths to other forms.
And just like with L2, it's time on task.
Yeah, exactly.
And what we do in the classroom is then destroyed by family practices, then it becomes even harder. Right. So it's not that they're incapable of doing this or they forget everything, but in some ways it's easier for L2.
But we also know of stories where our learners bring this new knowledge home, and then parents start really kind of being aware of how they are phrasing things and like start really relearning the standard Russian,
Or they start having family fights about what is right.
All right. So maybe
So my question was about when you were talking about formulating the metalinguistic concept, and it's to do with parts of speech. So because from my experience, though I don't work with heritage speakers as much, but every now and then I have them in my class. So a lot of heritage speakers do not have a concept of parts of speech because they don't need it in English. So how do you approach this, please?
Well, I would say that they actually do have a concept of part of speech. I think where they have difficulty is adjectives versus adverbs, and that's the influence of English. Tanya, I see you are nodding, so it's interesting, even in Italian perhaps, but they're quite capable of separating nouns from verbs, for example. Adjectives and nouns sometimes may be difficult for them, but it is the same similar kind of thing. So it's guided hypothesis building. It is cross-linguistic comparisons, but also internal language comparisons. It is an important part of the classroom, and it should start before we get into gender, case, inflections, etc. I'm mindful of the time. I'm sorry to rush through. Liana and Tanya, maybe we will be able to hear your questions. Liana, you want to go first?
Yes, thank you. Irina and Olesya, thank you so much for this presentation. I totally agree with you that we need to focus on this creating form meaning mappings, and the paper I'm just working on is about using prosing instruction and to see its effect on the acquisition of Russian gender in heritage speakers. And it seems like prosing instruction, one of the form-focused approaches, seems to be working for Spanish heritage speakers, and it looks like it's working for Russian heritage speakers. But speaking about this fact that form-focused activities should be in the context of the function. Prose instruction does not really do this. Can we say that those form-focused activities, they can be, integrated in the lesson, but does not necessarily have to be in the context? Like, you just introduce like a warm-up activity or in the middle or at the end of the class or something. Thank you.
I can respond to that if you,
Olesya, go ahead.
yeah. So this is an interesting discussion pertaining to SLA kind of theory and argumentation, right? And so far, what we see in the field is that it's kind of inconclusive. So there is a little bit of research that says, yes, explanation and automatization activities and context contribute to better uptake. Even within PI, within processing instruction framework, or no, it doesn't. And then there is a little bit of research coming out of more emergentist perspective camp that shows no, that is actually actively contributing to the automatization of the skill. So I would like to show you, to share with you a very recent paper, like literally hot off the press as of a couple of days now, on the acquisition of accusative case in L2 program, or in L2 Russian, sorry, using the kind of usage-based approach with concept formation, moving on to automatization, that sort of a thing, in contextual, in authentic contexts, where we show that, or I think fairly convincingly show that that sort of practice is key to the development of the skill. So we haven't really tested that in the heritage language program in a very systematic way. We've been talking about this a lot with Irina, but we have a sense that it does contribute to the development of the skill, and that for heritage speakers even more so, practice with authentic, let me rephrase it. It is really highly important for heritage learners to kind of develop, to work on automatization before we move into communicative activities. And this is where, it's like you're sort of a little bit of a PI argumentation is correct, that you don't need, meaning, but I also don't know how to divorce the two necessarily. Here's my answer. If it makes sense. Hopefully it makes sense. But I'm happy to share that paper with you, Liliana. Actually, I would like everyone to.
Do you want to put a link in the chat?
Sure.
I put a link
Yes,
in
I
the
will
chat
do that.
for the paper that we published, on which this presentation is based.
Right.
Tanya, do you have?
Oh, we're gonna get kicked out.
Yes.
Oh, we have to
Go
leave
ahead.
now. No.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
We have no time. So
we do. Go ahead. Ask your question.
Okay, thanks very much for your presentation. Very interesting code switching. We were interested in code mixing, and we did a question to our students and to our respondents, and they answered it could be okay, but someone answered that it's completely shouldn't completely be abandoned, the code mixing, because I suppose it would be for the context of use of the language. And then a very good point, the part of speech one, because as we analyzed, for example, possessive, adjective, possessive, and the Russian traditional grammar, they are possessive in any case, whether they are adjective or pronoun. But in the Western tradition,